Hi everyone, welcome back to the Stitches and Scribbles channel. My name is Erin and I've got a crafting podcast for you today. So if you watched my reading podcast, the episode of the podcast previous to this one, I talked a little bit about how we had house guests for most of the month of July, so that meant that we were out and about doing a lot of things. There was not a lot of time for sitting and reading, which meant there also was not a ton of time for crafting. So my items to show you are fairly minimal this month, but I also wanted to take the chance to tell you kind of how I prepare for phases like that where I know that I'm not going to have a lot of time to work on big projects that require a lot of materials, and kind of what I did to combat that and still get my crafting time in. So let's kind of start with that topic since I've already introduced it. I will have some finished objects, some whips, and some acquisitions to show you later in the video. So talking about traveling with crafting, one of the first things that I did, knowing that we were coming up on this phase, is I picked a bag and just tossed a bunch of stuff in it. So for the entirety of when those guests were here, this was my knitting bag. I put in a bunch of yarn for a couple different projects so that I didn't have to think about what I was going to pack each day to jump in the car and drive a couple hours or bring with me to the beach. Everything was just right in there. And because I wanted to have kind of an easy go bag for projects like that, I decided that for the majority of the time while guests were here, I was only going to work on socks. I picked socks because I decided to make socks as Christmas presents for my family this year. Last year I did my in-laws side of the family. This year I'm doing like my parents and my sibling, or my brother, and my husband as well. So I knew that I had a bunch of socks that I wanted to make, and socks are a fairly small project. So even though I put the materials for 4 pairs of socks in the bag, there was still a lot of extra space in there where I could throw in my water bottle or a book or something like that if I needed it. So socks were a great traveling project for that purpose. If you're planning on traveling with a bag of stuff like I did and you don't feel like doing socks, some other projects I'd recommend are making a bunch of hats. Usually hats only require 1 skein of yarn, whether you're knitting them or crocheting them. So hats are a great option. And if you've been making hats for a while, you probably don't need to look at a pattern, which makes it even more mobile. I was checking my sock pattern really just for stitch counts in a couple places, like the heels and the toes, but otherwise I could kind of just pick up wherever I needed to and do a few rows as I had time. And you can do the same with hats because usually they're pretty much a tube except for the crown of the head, so you can always save the crown of the head for when you have a little bit more focused time, or start a bunch of hats and finish them all after your busy season is over. It's totally up to you. Another great project is anything scrappy that you can take with you. Scrappy projects are great because they're usually fairly simple, whether it's a big rectangular blanket or a scarf, or making a bunch of repeated motifs, especially in crochet. But they're great because you don't have to take a lot of yarn with you at one time. And if you're doing something in motif pieces, you can take the finished motifs out of your bag in order to save space if you need to. So those would be my recommendations for projects to work on if you know you're going to have a lot of like short bursts of time to work instead of sitting and kind of luxuriating in a project. Other thing I would recommend is to make sure you use a bag big enough that you can take all of your notions with you too. I had an extra little bag inside of my big bag where I was putting all of my stitch markers and rulers and scissors and darning needles to weave in ends when I was done with things. That way it was all just ready to go right there in the bag for whenever I needed it for different steps of my project. I would say that this was pretty successful for me. I did finish 1 pair of socks and I'm like maybe 50% of the way through another pair of socks. So I would say that's pretty good progress. I did have a couple other projects I worked on too while guests were here that I just left in the house. So the other thing we ended up doing a couple times was watching movies, which was very fun. But while watching movies, I didn't want to have to turn the lights on because I know that most people don't enjoy that when watching a movie. So instead of working on my teeny tiny needles working on socks, I picked a crochet project with a bigger hook size and a thicker yarn so that I could kind of see my stitches in the dark with the movie on, or I could feel for them with my hands instead of having to rely on sight to work on it. So with all of that out of the way, let's dive into some finished objects. So the aforementioned finished pair of socks. This pair of socks is going to be for my mom, and I don't feel bad saying that because she watched me work on them the whole time that we were running around and doing stuff. So she already knows about these. But this pair of socks was made with a light turquoise that I've had in my stash for a while. I know it was originally from Hobby Lobby, but I believe it's a discontinued yarn. So just a plain light turquoise. And then the blue I actually got from Chicago Yarn Con. And I have the green skein up here, so I can do the name. So this was from Northwoods Fibers, and I remember that the color name was called Ocean Exploration, or Underwater Explanation. Exploration. So it was either Ocean Exploration or Underwater Exploration. I don't remember which one it was, but I think this turned into a beautiful pair of vanilla socks. I'll do a quick close-up of those colors. Really, really enjoyed working on these. I had a friend who saw me working on them too and said that they looked like rainbow fish, which made me smile, and that was a book that I read with my mom a lot when I was a kid. So one finished pair of socks. So going back to movie projects, I used to pretty standardly keep a basket by our couch for when my husband and I are watching movies in the evening to work on prayer shawls. I was a part of my prayer shawl committee at my church for a while I wasn't working a standard work week job. There were a couple years between when I left my previous teaching position and started full-time at my current one where I worked mostly sub days, which I could kind of pick and choose which ones I wanted, and it wasn't every day. Or I was working mostly craft fairs, which were in the afternoons and weekends. So because of when their meeting time was, I was able to go. I'm no longer able to attend the meetings because they take place during the workday. If you hadn't already guessed, most of the people on the prayer shawl committee are retired individuals. So significantly older than I am, but that's okay. We had a lot of fun. But I worked on prayer shawls during movies because usually it's a fairly repetitive stitch. They're not too complicated. There's no shaping because everything's just big rectangles. So I decided to pick that back up while watching movies while our guests were here because it was an easy thing to work on. I also had a couple of shawls or materials for shawls kind of out and ready before I was unable to continue with the prayer shawl committee. So now my goal is kind of just to finish up what I have and drop it off for them so that those shawls can still be used as part of the ministry for helping people who've gone through a loss or are going through a tough time. And then just kind of get supplies as needed. I had kind of built up a little bit too much of a stash in that area, so I'd like to diminish it so that I can work on other things. So that is why I picked prayer shawls to work on during the movies. So this one I actually finished, I think a while ago, but I don't know if I ever showed it on camera. It was just sitting in the basket. So this is a knit prayer shawl, just garter stitch with a crochet border. And I think this is the most relaxing version of a prayer shawl for me to work on because I can do garter stitch without looking. But just to kind of show you what it looks like on. So prayer shawls are typically rectangles. And for a while our group was very specific that they had to be rectangles. I believe now they'll accept triangle shawls, which is more my preference to wear. This feels very bulky to me, so if I was going to wear a prayer shawl, I prefer a triangle one. But this is kind of what it looks like. So it's meant to feel kind of like getting a hug from somebody, just a little bit of comfort if you're going through a tough time. So this is what I typically make for prayer shawls. A lot of garter stitch, The crocheted border, I think, just makes it look a little bit cleaner on the edges. But for the one that I worked on most of the time while our guests were here, I did a half double crochet prayer shawl. Partially because crochet is also quieter during movies than knitting is, because there's no needles clicking together. So I did crochet this one instead of knit. I did still do a single crochet border, and I think I did 2 rounds of a single crochet border. And both of these were made in Hobby Lobby's I Love This yarn in various colors. I don't know the names of, but that's what this one looks like on. And this one I made a little bit longer because I was doing a bigger, kind of more open stitch because I used a really big hook size, but I actually like this one a lot better than the other one. The other one is made kind of to standard dimensions for a prayer shawl, but this one is a little longer, but about the same width. So maybe it's just because I'm a little bit on the taller side that I prefer this one. But I also really like the colors. I think variegated yarns for a prayer shawl are very pretty. So those were my finished objects for the month. So not a huge amount of volume in terms of stuff I finished, which I did expect for the month of July with everything that we had going on. But those are the prayer shawls. So let's dive into whips. I also tried to keep my in progress projects fairly minimal during this month because I didn't want to be bouncing back and forth between too many things. So I do have, I'm staring at the pile right now, but I do have a pile of projects that were kind of just put on or continued to be in hiatus while this was going on. I also kind of batch filmed a bunch of Finisher Frog shorts before our guests arrived. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I now on both TikTok and YouTube Shorts, every Friday that I can do it, I do a Finisher Frog video where I take an old project and decide if I'm going to actually finish it or frog it and use the yarn for something else. And I had quite a few that needed to be just frogged, so I did those, and that kind of freed up some space, but I do still have quite a few baskets on the floor of stuff that needs to be finished, including my temperature blanket from 2021. How sad is that? I still need to finish that one, so that might be my next long-term project I work on YouTube Shorts, because that's very motivating for me to like get a couple rows done just to film a video for it. But anyway, diving into the whips. So as I mentioned, I have a pair of socks that is like halfway done as well from my big bag of socks that traveled with me for the trip. Oh, did I lose my stitch protector? That's very sad. Okay, well, here are the socks. So on this one, I picked up stitches after doing the heel, and this one I'm working on the foot. I'm supposed to have 2 of these little stitch guard things, but one of them appears to have fallen off of this sock, so it must be somewhere in the bottom of the bag, but I don't think I'm going to find it without taking everything out. I also can feel that there's sand in the bag somewhere. That's nice. I did take this to the beach, so I shouldn't be too surprised. But anyway, these socks are made with Patton's Croy Sock FX. This is a really old label. Somebody gave this yarn to me, so I don't know if this color is still available or if it's an identical color. But if you want something kind of similar, this is a more recent one I've purchased, and this is Patton's Croy Socks in the color Turquoise Stripes. So it's black instead of gray, but kind of a similar vibe. But these socks are going to be for my husband, and he also likes wearing bow ties, so I'm going to make a matching bow tie for him. I do have a bow tie pattern currently in my Etsy shop, but did I drop a ball of yarn? I did drop a ball of yarn. That's why there's a thread running all the way to the floor. There we go. Tiny ball of yarn. I do have a pattern available now for a bow tie in my Etsy shop, but I'm actually working on another one, so that will probably be one of my test rounds for the other pattern that I've been working on. for way too long at this point, but I'd rather get it right and go slowly than push it out when it's not ready yet. The second more active whip that I have is my scrap blanket, which I don't know if I've showed this a whole ton on my long YouTube videos, but this is also a short series that I do that I've been calling Scrappy Sunday, where I'm just taking all of my scraps and knitting it into a jelly roll style blanket. I didn't get a chance to work on this a lot while guests were here. I think I did film a Scrappy Sunday episode here and there, but it's probably halfway done or close to that. And I want this for my, not classroom, but the library at school where I work, just to drape over the back of a chair to add a little bit of color. But I think this is going to be a really fun blanket when it's done. Right now I'm working on this panel that has just started with the beige, but I kind of just make like scrap cakes of yarn and then work off of one cake at a time. But I do have a huge bag of scraps to work from. So this has gotten very random in terms of the colors that are being used in it, but I do really like it. I like how each stripe kind of has its own color story going on, because I tend to pair scraps together in some sort of an order, but sometimes I don't. Sometimes I do. Sometimes a stripe is all one yarn, like this one with the yellow, teal, pink, burgundy. That is actually all just a self-striping yarn, even though it looks like scrap panels like the rest of the blanket does. But this has been a very fun project to just work on occasionally. And last but not least, I started another prayer shawl. This one is made with, I believe it's a Karen skinny cake that I had in my stash, but I no longer have the label, so I think that's what it is. But I just started this one and I'm knitting this in the hurdle stitch. If you're interested in the hurdle stitch, I do have a tutorial for a scarf using this. That should be one of my more recent-ish videos. It's a bright orange scarf. You can't miss it in the tutorials or in the thumbnails. But this is what it looks like so far. And it's going to be a gray ombre. This is only half of the yarn, so it goes from like kind of a pale gray, cream to deeper grays. But those are the only projects that I currently have like actively in progress. So if you've been watching for a while, you notice there's a lot that are currently on hold. I was trying to only have those 3 out while we had guests, mostly to prevent having like too many baskets of stuff all over the house. Although I do generally do a pretty good job of at least keeping all my project bags down here, and then I just take them to other rooms when I want to work on them. Lastly, let's talk about some acquisitions. So the first acquisition that I have is actually from Hobby Lobby. Put it in a bag with other random stuff. But so the guests we had were coming from Europe, so there were a couple things we wanted to show them. Not so much that they're like prime tourist destinations, they're just very American. So we did go to a couple craft stores and even stores like Target and Kohl's and like kind of American big box stores just to show them. But they really liked shopping. So we did have a lot of fun in Hobby Lobby. There were a lot of little trinkets and craft supplies purchased by all. But when we went, yarn happened to be on sale, and I spotted these 2 colors right next to each other and thought that they would make an absolutely adorable pair of birthday socks, with this being the main color and this being the cuff, heels, and toes. These are both from the Yarn Bee Authentic Hand Dyed collection. This one is called Unicorn Horn. Let's get a close-up there of the color. So it's like a pinky cream with splotches of orange, indigo, magenta, turquoise, and some lighter pinks. And then this one is called Market at Malta. And that's kind of a variegated one with some deeper tones, but mostly a like tropical rainbow looking colorway. So I think these will be an adorable pair of socks. I was very excited to find that yarn. And then my other purchase for the month actually came from Old World, Wisconsin. I mentioned this in the recent book episode of my podcast, but we did go visit Old World, Wisconsin, which is a living history museum about what life in the 1800s was like for European immigrants to the United States. And they set up this village to kind of show what life would have looked like. So there are actors there who are giving tours, but also doing all of the tasks that would have been required in Wisconsin farmland at that time. One of which was spinning yarn and dyeing it. So they had a whole area, and I wish I could have spent more time talking to the people here, but we were trying to catch one of the tram rides back to the main entrance when I noticed where this was. But there was a group of women who were spinning the yarn and dyeing it so that they could get different colors, and they had swatches out of all the plants that they used to create the dyes. So when we got back to the gift shop and I saw that they had yarn that like had been made there, I had to get some. So I got 2 skeins of Old World, Wisconsin's Heritage Wool. These are both, looking at the tag, these are both 3-ply worsted yarn, and they are merino wool. So this is the undyed hank. This one was dyed with milkweed. So I'm not sure if I'm going to use both of these in the same project, but I made sure to get a similar weight for both of them so that I could if I wanted to. But I'm thinking this will be a really delightful big chunky hat for winter with some like squishy cables and tassels and the whole situation that you would want from a big chunky hat. But that's going to be it for this episode of the podcast. I hope you enjoyed watching. If you did, make sure you hit the subscribe button down below so you can see all of my crafty content right here on YouTube. If you'd like to follow me on other social media sites, that information is in the description box for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, everyone.